Oh, wow. That's louder than I expected. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name's Alan Tomlins. I am from Raw Material Coffee, and I'm going to be talking this morning about effective altruism in specialty coffee. Now, unfortunately, I did have a lovely presentation to show you on the screen, but I got a new computer from Apple recently, and in their brilliant foresight, they took all the HDMI ports out of their laptops, so we don't have a way to connect it, unfortunately. So there won't be any pictures, but hopefully I can still keep you interested, and I can certainly tell you everything I was going to tell you anyway. But yeah, we'll just have to do without the presentation, unfortunately. So, yeah, thank you very much for coming along. I hope you're all enjoying the festival. As I said, my name's Alan Tomlins. I'm the head of sales for Raw Material Coffee. And so I guess a good place to start is, what is raw material, and why does that qualify me to talk about altruism, and specifically effective altruism in the specialty coffee industry? So Raw Material ourselves, we are a social enterprise. We're a non-profit company. We are a non-profit coffee exporter and importer working in 5 countries that produce coffee. That is Colombia, Mexico, Burundi, Rwanda, and Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste is one of the newest countries in the world. It's a small country in Asia. It used to be a part of Indonesia. They had a brutal civil war in the 90s, and it's been its own nation since 2002. And that's the newest place that we've started working in, buying coffee. As I said, we operate as a coffee exporter. So we purchase and consolidate coffees in those countries. We then export them to the places where we sell them. So we export coffee here to Europe. We also export coffee to the Middle East and to Australia. And then we act as the seller to sell the coffee to coffee roasters, such as many of the people you'll see in the room here today. We operate as a non-profit business. We're registered as a CIC, or a community interest company, in the UK. That means we are a regular limited business. We're not a charity. We operate like a limited company. But mandated in our kind of articles of association is the fact that 100% of our profits have to be returned to the communities we represent, those communities being the coffee producing communities that we work with in those 5 countries. So as a non-profit company, we built our company and we operate within the framework of a movement called effective altruism. Effective altruism is a school of, I guess, philosophy, or a school of thought based around giving. That is designed to increase the efficiency and impact of our actions and our donations that we make through improved decision making. That's a little bit wordy. To paraphrase it a little bit better, it was a school of thought developed by a bunch of scholars and philosophers at Oxford University, principally a guy called William McCaskill, and he wrote quite a famous book called Doing Good Better, which kind of sums up all the kind of tenets of it, and that's really the best way to sort of paraphrase the approach of effective altruism. It is doing good better. So if we wish to do some sort of specific good, if we want to donate money or our time, or we want to take actions that we think will improve society or the world, it's ensuring that they are doing good better, that they're doing the maximum they can do with the given thing that we have. So to give a couple of examples there to kind of contextualize it outside of coffee, let's say you have £50 that you want to donate to a charity, and you want to help the cause of preserving human life. So you've got 50 quid, you want to give it to a charity. Now, kind of one of the most natural things is to look for a cause that maybe is local to you, or maybe holds a specific interest to something that relates to you, something that drives you to want to give to that specific cause. However, if you have £50 and really what you want to do with that £50 is preserve as much human life as possible, by far the most effective thing you could do would be to donate it to a charity that would provide malaria nets, like insecticide-covered malaria nets, or to put it to charities that provide clean drinking water for people that don't have access to it. These things are by far the biggest problem, the biggest causes of human death globally every year, and they're generally quite solvable with quite a small amount of capital and resource. So it may not be the most emotive pull in terms of where you want to give, but again, for that, say £50, £100, whatever it is, that will have the most effect if your desired outcome is to preserve human life. Similar way as well, maybe not related to giving money, but let's say that you want to reduce the amount of meat that you eat. You think that's a good thing to do, you think that would help the world. Let's say, for the sake of this argument, you're not prepared to become fully vegetarian, you want to continue to eat some meat. Now, if you want to reduce that meat consumption because you are concerned about the effects of meat production on climate change, then you should almost certainly stop eating beef, and let's say you should eat chicken instead. Beef is incredibly bad for the planet. Beef production is incredibly bad for the planet. It uses huge swathes of land. It produces lots of CO2. It uses a lot of resources. But on the flip side, if you want to cut down your meat consumption because you're concerned about animal welfare and the treatment of animals, but you still want to eat some meat, you should probably choose to eat beef and not eat that chicken, because while industrial beef facilities, I don't want to say slaughterhouses, but industrial kind of beef processing facilities, they're not nice places by any means, but comparatively compared to the conditions for chickens and intensively farmed chicken and battery hens, they're a lot better, and the quality or the perceived quality of life for the cows is probably better. So it really depends what you're trying to achieve with that decision as to what you should do. And this is really the kind of key idea of effective altruism. It's really examining why we do what we do and where we give what we give based on the desired outcome. So it would be much nicer if I had my pictures here. There wasn't a picture of a dead cow, I promise. It wasn't that bad. But this takes us on to really then, so effective altruism in coffee. So how do we apply these principles to the work that we do in coffee? And when I talk about coffee, I'm talking from the perspective of what we call like the green coffee industry. As I say, I work for an exporter and importer. We work with green, unroasted coffee from the farm before it reaches the coffee roasters and is kind of prepared into its final stages here. So when we look at applying these principles of effective altruism to green coffee production, we really have a criteria of 3 things that we look at when we look at initiatives and what we can do. And what that is it means everything that we do to fit the principles of effective altruism, everything we do should be scalable, it should be solvable, and it should be designed to help the most neglected people, producers, or communities. The reasons for this are essentially again, I had a lovely quote that would be on the screen here. One of the key points of effective altruism is that it's critical to pay attention to how many people are affected by a particular intervention. When we do this, it seems that ways of doing good are over 100 times more effective than others. So again, if you're going to do something, if that one thing can be scalable, if it can reach many, many people, or if it can reach only a few people, then obviously it's going to have a much bigger effect if it can reach a large group of people. Within the coffee industry, this means that we focus on working with smallholder coffee producers. So generally, a lot of people, when they think of coffee farms, you think of very large single estates that produce a lot of coffee. And there are a lot of those. They produce very good coffees. They do very good things. But the vast majority of coffee producers globally, around 12 million, are what we would call smallholder coffee producers. So these would be family units that own probably somewhere between 1 and maybe 5 hectares of land. They produce coffee, would be one of a number of things they produce within the household, either for subsistence or for livelihood. And coffee is just part of what they live off and what they do on a daily basis. So we focus on working with smallholder coffee producers. As I say, there's around 12 million of those in the world. Around 50% of those smallholders live below the international poverty line, and many of those actually live below the extreme poverty line, which would be PPP adjusted for 2022 is living on less than $2.47 a day. So a very high number of coffee producers are living in those sort of conditions. And so, again, the work that we do, if we want to be the most effective with our approach, would be to focus on working with these sectors of the coffee producers, where it means we can reach the most people and it will have the most impact because the standard of life is that much lower than, even people slightly higher up the chain. So that was problems have to be scalable. The next issue we look at is problems have to be solvable. So if we're going to try and do something, it has to be something that actually we can have an effect. It is something that can be solved. So for example, we can't fix climate change. That's not something, it's certainly something we can address in certain things that we do, can address certain small issues that all contribute to climate change. But as an overarching goal for us as a business, we can't say that we can address climate change. That's not something that we can fix. Likewise, for example, in Burundi, one of the countries that we work in, Burundi, we can't pay more money for coffee. The way that coffee is traded in Burundi, producers bring their coffee cherries to central processing facilities that are owned by small businesses. And in most countries, it's an open market, and it's a competitive market. So the processing facilities will pay a higher price for better quality cherries, and we can pay a higher price. But in Burundi, the government very heavily regulates the price of cherry. There's a maximum price. You cannot pay more than that. It's very problematic if you do. So We can't solve, in Burundi where we work, we can't tackle the purchase price. It's not something that we can do. But what we can do then is find other social ways to return more value to households. So we employ a lot of people in Burundi. It means that we are able to pay wages far higher than the minimum wage and far higher than the market. We also provide health insurance for the families that deliver coffee to our processing facilities. This is very important in Burundi. Going back to the malaria nets, malaria is a really big problem in Burundi, and the average person there does not have health insurance. So malaria is something that's very easily preventable without the right facilities or insurance to get treatment. Can be a very deadly disease as well. So the problems have to be solvable. We have to look at the problems that we can't solve and then look at the ones that we can and then see what we can do there. So we've got scalable, solvable, and then the third one was dealing with the most neglected. Again, this is the point of if we're going to be the most effective, we're going to reach the most people. If we look at communities and areas that are already well served with development or already have very strong access, let's talk about coffee producers specifically. If they already have good access to the specialty market, they have the ability to sell to specialty coffee buyers at good prices that are sustainable, then we're not needed there. So we choose very specifically about where we work and we limit where we work. We don't work where we're not required. And in fact, in Colombia, where we've been working for more than 10 years, we are finding our work there is less and less needed as the prices have gone up in Colombia and demand has increased. Our work purely as a coffee buyer is less needed. And while we've centralized some of our operations there, we're focusing more of our buying and our demands on countries like Timor-Leste, like Burundi, and the parts of Mexico that are still quite neglected by the specialty coffee market, whether this be for reasons of perceived quality or reasons why it's very difficult to work there. So Timor-Leste is a great example of that. It's, as I said, it's one of the youngest nations in the world. They're not far removed from civil war. The infrastructure there is almost non-existent. There's also the basic rates of literacy and maths literacy are incredibly low because most of the adult generation now grew up in the civil war. Effectively, there was no education during those 2 decades of civil war. So all of these things make it an incredibly challenging place to work, and this is part of the reason why they don't have as much access to the market, because less people are prepared to go through the challenges of working there. So again, this is the idea of working with the most neglected. You'll have the most impact because no one else is doing it. So putting those ideas into action, to be a little bit specificer then, a little bit specific, if we know we want to be effective, we want to solve some of these problems, we want to look at things that are scalable, solvable, and deal with the most neglected. What does that actually look like for us and what we do where we work? So the number one way we think to tackle all of those issues, and it's pretty much a very accepted fact, I think, in development circles, is the best thing that we can do is just pay the highest price we possibly can for the coffee. So we talk about the farm gate price. That would be the price the coffee producer receives for their coffee. There's various other prices along the chain, but the price paid to the coffee producer is called the farm gate price. What this represents varies in different countries. As I say, in Burundi, we buy coffee cherries and they're processed. In other countries, such as Colombia or Mexico, we buy what's called parchment coffee, where the producer has already processed the coffee themselves and dried it, and it's almost ready for export. So we buy at different stages of the chain. But wherever we are buying directly from the producer, we aim to return as much profit as we can at that point and pay the highest price possible. So we almost reverse engineer that. If we know we're going to buy from the farmer in Mexico and eventually we're going to sell to the coffee roaster here in Brighton, we sort of reverse engineer it. So we look at what's the highest price that we know we can sell the coffee, where the roaster, who presumably is invested in what we're doing and wants to pay a good price, what's the highest price they can sustainably pay to make sure they can sell the coffee and find a market for it. We then take that price, we know how much margin we need to capture along the way to cover warehousing costs, importing costs, exporting costs. So we subtract all of those, and then that leaves us with what the price we should be able to pay the producer is to make it as high as possible. Again, this is our main goal for everything we do. This is the number one way to improve profitability, is rather than for us to dictate what should be invested in, what money should be spent on, is just to increase income into households, and that is the best way to improve and to tackle poverty. The other way that we would do this, and the one thing we do, is we capture a small amount, every container of coffee we export, we capture a small amount of money that we then use to invest in community projects in all the areas that we work. These are big projects that are designed to either increase the quantity of coffee people can produce or the quality of it. When we say quality, I guess it's the improving the perceived value to the buyer. So if we can do something like applying a fancy process or drying the coffee better or whatever it might be, if we can do something that will improve the taste of the coffee, the perceived value, the cup score, then we know we can create a higher price for that coffee, and then we can return that higher price to the producer. So either by, sometimes we'll invest in things to improve quantity, so this is usually agricultural. So it will be if we can provide training for coffee producers, if we can provide agricultural inputs such as fertilizer or seedlings like new coffee trees, because coffee trees, once they become older than maybe 10 to 15 years, they're not as productive as they could be. So you either need to replace them or like prune them and regrow them. But basically providing agricultural inputs or providing infrastructure to allow them to process the coffee more efficiently, that will allow the producer to produce more coffee. So if they're producing more coffee from their 1 or 2 hectares of land, they're going to increase their household profitability. Or we can help to try and improve the quality. So by building our own processing facilities, by buying coffee from producers, handling the processing ourselves, which is a cost that we can then bear rather than asking the producer to bear that. We also have capital we can invest in these processing facilities to allow the coffee to be processed to a higher level than the producer has the financial means to do so. By doing that, the coffee generates a higher sale price. And again, if they sell their coffee for more money, then of course they're going to receive more money into the household as well. So these are really our 2 kind of levers for pulling. And then specifically in action with that, going back to paying the highest price possible. It varies for us in country to country, but even over the last 2 years, when world coffee prices have been higher than they've been for about 15 or 20 years, we've still been able to pay on average around 30% higher to the producers for their coffee than they would have received with the counterfactual, like the most likely other means they would have had to selling it. Again, that varies. It's higher in Timor-Leste, it's lower in Colombia, but as a rounded average, around 30%. And then with the community projects in Timor-Leste, in Burundi, and in Colombia, we've built our own centralized processing facilities, be they wet mills or dry processing facilities, that allow us to buy coffee directly from the producers, to apply the very kind of high-end, like anaerobic, anoxic processes. You'll see a lot of coffees today that have been processed in very fancy ways, not just simply washed or natural, but maybe they've had yeast inoculations or anaerobic processes or something like this. We've been able to build centers where we can apply these processes to the coffee at our own cost, and that helps to dramatically increase the sale price of the coffee and therefore the price the producer eventually receives. And in Mexico, we've began also producing centralized composting points. So we're able to produce within the groups we work a centralized composting point within each town or association that can produce very high quality organic compost, can be distributed free to all the members of the association. And this helps to improve the production, the quantity of production very, very quickly at very low cost as well. So these are the kind of ways that we find is the most effective way to deliver this sort of impact. And then to put all of that into perspective, our numbers are a little bit out of date. Not out of date, but our numbers, they need updating, but it's very hard work. But in Colombia in 2019, we know through analysing the market data and through knowing what the most likely alternative for producers was, which in Colombia, the Colombian government guarantees to buy all the coffee a producer produces. The Colombian government guarantees you can show up any day and you can sell them your coffee and they will buy it at the published price, which changes daily. So it's the one country where we know for sure exactly what the most likely alternative was for the producers to sell their coffee to rather than to us. So in 2019, we know that producers in Colombia that sold their coffee to us earned 5.2 times more profit for their coffee than they would have done if they had sold it into the most likely other supply chain. 5.2 times more profit than they would have done, and all at a cost that works out at less than 1 US cent per cup of final coffee. And that's by using these effective and directed and targeted impact approaches. We can deliver more than 5 times more profit for the final cost of less than a cent per cup, which is, what, half a pence maybe. So yeah, we believe that is how effective altruism can work in coffee. That's our experience in Colombia, Mexico, Burundi, Rwanda, and Timor-Leste. There's a lot of other coffee producing countries. There's different approaches will work better there, but that's what we've found. And yeah, I hope that was interesting. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If anyone has any questions, I'd love to dig into it. But otherwise, thank you very much.